start, and then we'll do our introductions. All right, welcome to Markers and Milestones, where we explore educational opportunities for young men and women beyond traditional college, all from a Christ-centered perspective. I'm Lee Bortons, and I'm with my co-host, Amity Shlaes. Today's August 7th, 2023, and we're really excited to welcome Amity Shlaes. She is a founder of the Coolidge Institute, as well as a promoter of all things freedom and just a lover of classical literature and so many things that we have in common. So thanks for being on the show, Amity.
Lee, I'm so glad to be with you.
So we have a question for you tonight. We want you, before we're all said and done, to let the families listening know about the Coolidge Institute and the opportunities you offer there for debate and summer programs and things. But before that, Calvin's neglected. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you fell in love with Calvin and why the rest of us should be paying attention.
The answer is economics, 100% economics. I was a member of the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal when I was younger, and I went back to the history of the US economy, particularly the 1930s, and wrote a book about the 1930s called Forgotten Man. And if you wanted to reduce that book's conclusion to one sentence, Lee, you'd say, they broke it. That is, the government broke the US economy in the 1930s, and Americans suffered as a result. But what was so good about the economy before? What was it the government broke? It was a genuinely strong economy, the economy of the 20s. And then I began to wonder who made that economy. And if you want to give the achievement to one man, you would give it to President Calvin Coolidge, who served from 1923 to 1929, well, March 29, in the Roaring 20s. And right now it's the centennial of the Coolidge presidency, because President Coolidge actually became president in August 1923 upon the death of Warren Harding. Coolidge was vice president, and the president unfortunately passed away. And suddenly this man from New England, Calvin Coolidge, was US president.
So that's where you fell in love with them, was because of economics.
Well, I would say fell in love with. I would say my analysis suggests that presidents are all like stocks, right? They go up and down in ranking. And the president who is the most misrated, whose price is too far off, his reputation is very far away from his value, it would be Calvin Coolidge. He did so much for the US economy and for the American people, because this isn't just a mathematical proposition or a proposition relating to acquisitions, such as, say, the splendid acquisitions of the 20s, which included a car, electricity, the first family washing machine, which meant a lot, the telephone, the radio, and Saturday off, but also I think the spiritual well-being of the US, because Americans saw they could do things for themselves. Families saw they could do things for themselves and do all right. So this was a wonderful period when America essentially found its modern footing and found its footing after World War I. And that was thanks to President Coolidge. And specifically, of course, to policies that he promulgated. Most importantly, he led a tax reduction, a serious tax reduction, about halved taxes. He made clear to the people that taxes were going only in one direction, down. He held back on regulation. He respected states, local governments, and families. So he took us closer to the America of the founding, the America of Tocqueville, and that most people thought was a good thing. He was enormously popular. We have a new movie out about Calvin Coolidge. You can see it actually on PBS South Dakota, because it's posted there right now, or was today when I looked. And in that movie, what you'll see is Coolidge deciding not to run again. He decided not to run as Washington had. Again, because he believed presidents shouldn't loom too large on this stage, certainly not for too long. So he left. And at the time, this was regarded as kind of not just heterodoxy, but almost just deeply wrong because he was so popular that he was sure to have broad coattails. Everyone, just about everyone liked him. Most of America liked him, and it was sort of a political betrayal, but it was not a moral betrayal by Coolidge. He was making a point, which is America is great, the people are great, the leaders serve the people, and a leader who becomes like a king, well, that's not a good leader.
And in contrast to the one that followed soon after, FDR and his 4 different elections.
Well,
Totally
that's
different
right.
attitude.
And at King's College, where I used to teach, we compared the 2 presidents.
Mm.
The Roosevelts tend to be like kings, starting with Theodore Roosevelt, who was being sculpted or beginning to be sculpted on Mount Rushmore when Coolidge was in South Dakota making his decision not to run. Theodore Roosevelt said the presidency is a bully pulpit, by which he meant an awesome pulpit, an awesome race car to drive. That is, the man was as important as the pulpit or office. Coolidge had the opposite view. He knew that the man was smaller than the institutions and were there to serve. So Franklin Roosevelt, think of Coolidge as between Roosevelts, after Theodore Roosevelt and before Franklin, likewise said, well, it's all about me, isn't it? It's about me. He said that during the election of 36. So you had 2 big egos in the Roosevelts, and Coolidge was the opposite.
And how would you compare, or what would, I should put it this way, what would Calvin say about what's happening now? Is this a similar time period? Very different?
Well, I think it's more similar than we allow, which is the country's in the middle of a change. Actually, we're coming out of a pandemic, as we were when he became president, because we were coming out of the influenza after World War I. We're coming out of a great crisis, economic disruption. And he said, let's just go back to first principles. In fact, one of the many things you hear is that the Constitution is too old, that it can't work today. It can't answer the problems of Google, or that one might confront via Google. It can't answer the addiction to various drugs. It can't answer what Coolidge showed, and he lived in a rather modern period. They did have the telephone. They did have new technology. They did have, in those days, alcohol was considered the great trouble for addiction. He showed the Constitution could work to address those troubles by restoring the authority of the locals. So I think of him as a sort of a modern founder and a bridge to the founders, because he understood that the Constitution is, and particularly the Declaration, but both are quite sufficient to address wrongs, and that I think he would say there's not much different today. Just because we have new technology, that doesn't mean we're different. Perhaps families have too little authority to teach their children. That's the problem. If young people become, say, beholden to or addicted to technology, well, that's a family problem, not a government problem, he would say. And he would also say, have hope, because he was, even though he was a quiet guy, kind of an optimist.
Yeah. Can you tell us any funny stories about him being called Silent Cal?
Oh, absolutely. There's a famous story that we think is true. We're not sure, but we think is true. A fancy lady was sitting next to Calvin at a party, and she'd heard he was supposed to be silent. So she said, I made a bet I could get you to say more than 2 words tonight. And Coolidge's reply was, you lose. And he didn't say more. But I know another story. Another story was, he demonstrated that deliberate action is important. The thing about Coolidge was he was no slob. He really did what he said he was going to do, and he didn't do much else. He worked hard. So, other people in the White House will name their pets funny things. I don't know, Bo, Socks. We know all the names of the White House pets. Barney. Coolidge got twin lions as a gift, cubs, and he named them Budget Bureau and Tax Reduction. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to show the people that with every atom of his being, he really was trying to constrain the federal budget and lower taxes. I didn't mention it before, but it's quite important to note that Coolidge cut the budget. He cut the budget so well that when he left office, the budget was lower than when he came in. Today, presidents say they can't do that. The very most they might be able to do, and they don't even do that, is reduce the rate of increase of the budget. Coolidge actually cut the budget. So, wow. And over 67 months, he served as president 67 months. So we kind of want to honor that and see what we can learn from it.
So is he the last president to have done that?
You could argue in some ways Eisenhower was pretty good, actually. But I think Coolidge's record is cleaner in terms of proving that he did it. Presidents do cut the budget after wars. Coolidge was the last sustained budget cutter among the peacetime presidents, to be precise. So there it is. And he had economic growth to go with that. He had 4% real growth, which is kind of an aspirational figure today, and all the other benefits to Americans that I described before. He had a remarkable electoral victory in 1924 when he did run for office. There were three parties, and usually what happens when there are three parties is the best one can do is a plurality. And usually, by the way, the Democrats win in our experience. Think about how President Clinton won when there was Ross Perot in the Republican Party by a plurality. There were three parties in Coolidge's time. The Progressives had a party, and they did rather well. I believe over 16%, which makes them about like Ross Perot. Yet Coolidge took an absolute majority, which means he beat the other two parties combined, not a mere plurality. That's quite a feat. And it's because he was a man who did what he said.
So I'd like to introduce my co-host again, Amanda. She's the one that asks all the philosophical questions. I'm kind of the one that says, tell us what and why what and how she gets to the why. So do you have some questions for Amity before we jump into the Coolidge Institute?
Well, one, I'm fascinated, and I apologize. I have not read your book, but I am so appreciative for you highlighting Calvin Coolidge's track record, because we really do need, in Markers and Milestones, people to see it can be done. Things are possible. It may be a hard work. So one of the things that I'm interested in your thinking about is first principles. You quickly threw out that he went back to first principles. So philosophically, what were some of the first principles that he rooted his decision on?
Well, part of Coolidge's humility was his religious faith. So you imagine in the period there were people like Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great jurist, who was suggesting, well, there may be no power up there. Law derives from man. And Coolidge came from the same turf as Oliver Wendell Holmes. Of course, Holmes became a Supreme Court justice, and so did Brandeis. Both of them were from Massachusetts. Where was Coolidge from? Massachusetts. He was governor of Massachusetts. So he swam in the same, the same shore waters, so to speak, the same state as did those great jurists. And what Coolidge said, which is something different, even while he was merely the president of the Massachusetts State Senate, was, men do not make laws, they do but discover them. That's a profoundly humble thing to say. Where do the laws derive from? Well, they derive from up there. They derive from a higher power. Here I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he meant. He also saw a limit to the law that man can make. Don't write too many laws. And when you do write laws, he said to his father, it's better to kill a bad law than pass a good one. His father was also a lawmaker in Vermont. And he also said, give administration a chance to catch up with legislation. That is, the very act of making laws is not in and of itself virtuous. The laws have to be worth it, and they have to express some higher knowledge, some older knowledge, often to work. Very unmodern, very unfashionable in the period he was working, which is the period of the new, I would call it, positivist law. I don't know what it is in philosophical terms, but Coolidge never said Brandeis is a bad man, or I really disagree with Oliver Wendell Holmes in a strong way, because he was quite polite, but his arguments were in a different direction, pushing back. And he also gave a wonderful speech, which you'll hear about while he was president, called The Inspiration of the Declaration. So that was in 26, which I would guess is the sesquicentennial of the Declaration of Independence. And he said in that speech, about the Declaration, there's something that's exceedingly restful. If all men are equal, that is final. We don't have to make an advance beyond this proposition and call ourselves people who have made progress. Really, no progress can be made beyond that proposition. All men are created equal. And our job is to edit our earthly law better in order to reflect that original proposition. In addition, I think a first principle, which dear to his heart, was federalism. He really believed in states. He grew up in an era when states were more powerful than Washington. If you can imagine, if you took all the state budgets together, and the town budgets, they amounted to more than the budget of Washington. That flip where Washington became more important than states, that came only in peacetime under Franklin Roosevelt in 1936. So Coolidge lived in an era of states, but he saw the danger to states by the encroachment of impingement of the federal government. And so he constantly tended states, focused on states, showed their merit. When he was president of the Senate in Massachusetts, he gave an address that he called "Have Faith in Massachusetts." He didn't say "Have faith in the federal government." He didn't even say "have faith in God." He said "have faith in Massachusetts." No, she may fail here and there, but in general, no other state can surpass her. He believed in state and local government. And then when he was president, he still believed in state and local government. I'm going to paraphrase here, but he dedicated the Arizona State Zone, and he basically said the United States is, or are, because he thought of the states in plural, being true to the language, inviolate only insofar as Arizona is inviolate. That is, we are built of states, and unless we respect states, we crumble and tumble. Wow, that's very interesting. Those two, but I'd say those two things: the subordination to a higher law, and he studied the framers quite a bit, and he saw what they saw, that this was based on a higher law, that our founding, as Janice Rogers Brown says, the former federal judge, is a spiritual event. It's not just a mechanistic event with a pretty good document. It was a spiritual event that reflected a lot of knowledge of spiritual life. And when you ignore that, you lose it all. So these are all points he made, and I will say beautifully, he's one of the best writers among the presidents. He has a homiletic way of writing. He naturally writes about 8 minutes, like a sermon, or 12 minutes, but not an hour. And he speaks very clearly. His sentences are short and straight. I don't know why he's not appreciated. I think it's all sort of, in history, it's about hero worship, and Roosevelt's usually the hero, both Roosevelts. So the lower people in the eyes of standard history books just get ignored or get disparaged, and that's unfortunate.
How did he get elected?
He got elected. Well, he was vice president. What happened was the country kind of shook itself and said, we need common sense. So they elected Warren Harding and Coolidge, whose platform was called normalcy, in 1920. And I don't know about you, but I'm not comfortable with the word normalcy. It's not my favorite word. And as a kid, I thought, they want us to be normal. They want us to be, like cogs or pegs that fit in. That's not what they meant. What they meant by normalcy, Harding and Coolidge, is we want a normal law and order. Coolidge was in charge of the law and order environment, so people could start a business. So people basically, the private sector is very important for our recovery from World War I. In that period too, the U.S. labored under the burden of stupendous debt from the war. So the only way we can get out from under this is if business has a role. We better respect it and give it a normal environment. And then when Harding passed away, that summer of 23, Coolidge became president, and he was perceived, I think it's fair to say, as a lame duck sort of figure. He was called the accident of an accident, a vice president who nobody knew that much about and became president. But he moved with so deliberately and with such confidence, not to change Harding's agenda, but rather to fulfill it. And people liked the humility of that. And they were beginning to see that the Harding agenda, or the normalcy agenda, was good for the economy, even for poor people. And so they did elect Coolidge in 24.
Mhm. Any more questions, Amanda? That was a good one.
I really appreciated that. The other thing that isn't philosophical, but how much influence it could have now, he said what he would do and he did what he said. I've heard you say various constructions of that about Coolidge, and just I'd love to hear another story about what he said he'd do and then how he did it.
Well, these are some tough stories. I mean, he said he really didn't want what we would call entitlements, and he vetoed the entitlement of the day, which was the bonus for soldiers. The bonus at that time was really a pension. That's what it was for soldiers. And he didn't dislike soldiers. States had pensions for soldiers. He was very proud of soldiers. But he didn't think it was a good precedent for the federal government to start paying a perpetual pension. So he said no. At times he was overridden. A good example would be farm subsidy, because Coolidge came from Vermont. Well, what's Vermont? It's not a great ag state, right? If you're going to farm in the ground, you want to move to the Midwest. And that's what a lot of people did. It's just the Midwest is just far more, the plains are far more productive. In Vermont, they say they farm rocks. What do Vermonters do? Well, they have dairy, right? Because you don't have to plow, particularly in a period when we didn't have modern plows. And then you make what? Cheese. What's cheese? It's an exercise in economic desperation. You don't have refrigeration yet. You don't have a train to take your milk to market. So you make cheese and ship it. And that in Vermont, in Coolidge's town, which I hope you visit, there's the cheese factory founded by his father. So Coolidge well understood the plight of agriculture because he grew up in it. And so the farming lobby, being shrewd, said, well, we'll get a subsidy, right? Because he understands. And I won't do a very good job imitating Coolidge, but here's about the timing of it. Coolidge was famously not always too talkative. So his response to their imploring of subsidy for farming, he said, well, farmers never have made too much money. Pause. Don't suppose they ever will. Pause. Don't suppose there's much the government can do about that. Pause. Farmers never have made much money. Don't suppose they ever will. Don't suppose there's much the government can do about that. He did not endorse subsidies for farmers. Another example, which was painful and heroic, was there was a terrible natural disaster in 1927, the flood of the Mississippi. And there was thousands of deaths, I believe. Anyway, thousands of towns destroyed, a major disaster, bigger in some ways, I believe, bigger than Katrina. So I'm faltering here, I should know better. But anyway, an enormous disaster, the first modern natural disaster. And Coolidge was being pressed for the government to subsidize not only rescue, but rebuilding, change the whole river network. And he didn't want to do that. And he thought the states should take care of citizens in their disaster areas. So while he sent the Red Cross, which was a big deal, he didn't go himself to the Mississippi. He thought that if he went, it would be almost impossible for him to veto the kind of spending or new infrastructure he wanted to veto, and perhaps if he went also, then his veto stood a greater chance of being overridden. So he didn't go, and everyone was pretty cross. They said he had no heart. And one senator, Senator Caraway, said, you're stretching my memory. I think he was from, anyway, I think it was Arkansas. Senator Caraway said, you know, if it were his region that were flooding, he would go, right? President Coolidge, but he doesn't care about the South, right? And then there was a kind of divine retribution, because it as perceived by the papers in any way, case, not sure I believe that, but as perceived by the papers, because then there was a flood in Coolidge's own region in Vermont that very year at his, in where his house was and so on. And people thought, of course he'll go. Coolidge didn't go to Vermont either. Why not? He didn't care about the Vermont people. No, because as one Vermonter or reporter said, he can't do for his own what he didn't do for others.
Mhm.
And the Vermonters understood that. He didn't. He went a year later. He saw how they had rebuilt. He praised them, but he didn't want to rescue his family if he didn't rescue all American families. Very consistent. And today such a concept would meet with incomprehension. Every president lobbies for his town to get the Olympics or something like that, right? Hey, that's the way it is. But Coolidge did not perceive politics as sports. This is not about rallies and enthusiasm and fighting for your team. It's not a team. And that's very much like Edmund Burke. You think of Edmund Burke's remarks, I think, to the electors at Bristol, where he explained he represented them, but he wasn't their ambassador. Really, once he was elected to Parliament, he represented all of the United Kingdom. It wasn't just his little constituency, and he was turned out of Bristol for that reason, Burke. But I searched high and low for a connection between Burke and Coolidge, because I see many Burkean ideas in Coolidge, but I did not find the document. I did not find where Coolidge said, my favorite philosopher is Burke. I'll leave that to the students of classical conversations to undig that one.
Thanks,
Fascinating.
Amity.
Well, Lee, I think we probably need some more practical questions.
Yeah, we do. Because we only got about 10, 15 minutes. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show called Markers and Milestones is because we're trying to help parents see there's all kinds of ways to mark various entry into adulthood, and there's different milestones that the children will look back on. And I think what you're doing up at the Coolidge Institute with the young people is one of those markers we hope as many people as possible will participate in. So can you explain exactly what happens at the Institute and how things are funded and some of the logistics of it all?
Absolutely. The Coolidge Foundation, it was created to honor Coolidge's values and to share them with students. Particularly, we emphasize young people. And we have two programs with both of them with many homeschoolers in them. And the third, I'd like to get started if Lee is interested, or four. We have a new Coolidge movie, and fairly soon we'll post it and you can show it to your children. It's a 1 hour long movie. Right now it's on public television, South Dakota, as I mentioned. It's been on Fox too. On Fox Nation, you can pay for it too.
I'll have Emma, before you do number two, Emma, she's our producer's listing. Let's make sure we get that link.
Sorry, wait, I'm be right out.
Okay, so I'm talking to Emma right now, our producer, asking her to make sure she gets the link to that movie onto our social media.
Yeah, that'd be great. She
gave
me
a thumbs up. Keep going, Amity. What's number two?
Number two is we have a debate program led by Jared Rhodes, RHOADS, J Rhodes, at calvin-coolidge.org. J Rhodes at calvin-coolidge.org. And it's Jared Rhodes, RHOADS. He's the debate director. And we have a contest every year, which culminates in a cup, the 4th of July. And we do bring finalists to the cup. And this contest has two areas: debate, if you have a team, or declamation, giving a Coolidge speech. So a kid can do that with a video. And then we bring the strong candidates to Plymouth Notch to where the president was born, a very beautiful town in Vermont, sort of near Killington, the ski resort, if you've heard of that, or Woodstock, Vermont. Anyway, you just go up from Massachusetts, or you can fly in. And we have 100 or so kids every summer to compete in giving speeches or debating. This year, the kids debated whether Coolidge deserved higher rank, and I'm pleased to say it was a very fair debate. And about half the time, the anti-Coolidge side won, which is good because we don't want to have a rigged debate, even if it's about Calvin Coolidge. That program is going. It's based mainly in North Carolina because we've worked with the Luddy schools there, charters, private and parochial schools founded by Bob Luddy and his family. But we also have ways in for people who are not in the Luddy network, including homeschoolers. Homeschoolers have done just fine in our competitions. Declamation is a very easy way to get in because you just practice the speech and give it. I would encourage people to speak clearly and slowly because we are a traditional debate league, which means we don't like fast talk too much because a lot of citizens can't understand when people talk too fast or talk softly. So pretend you're a founder and the speeches you're going to be giving are Calvin Coolidge's. So you can and you can see samples on our website, and we have quite healthy prizes for those. So kids get subsidy to come if they make the finals, at least right now, that's what we've done. And we have prizes and they stay in a hotel. Many bring their parents because they're minors and have a great time. The Coolidge site is open all summer. You can bring your children there, drive there. It's extremely beautiful, sort of a northern colonial treasure and pretty small. You can walk around, see the Coolidge grave, which is just as low as his neighbors. He's very humble. And see the cheese factory and have Moxie, which is his preferred soda from the village, and get a feel for what life was like in this small village for the Coolidges. We also have a national scholarship called the Coolidge Scholarship and Senators Program. That is an academic merit scholarship. We have had homeschoolers do just fine. Miss Morgan, one of our early winners, was a homeschooler. She went to Grove City and works in engineering now. She's a wind engineer. But that is on our website. Look for coolidgescholars.org or the Coolidge Foundation website. That is an incredibly competitive contest. We had 4,100 candidates for 5 scholarships this year. Because it is about academic merit and quantifiable merit, like scores, does count, which is different right now from the culture of many many universities, where we respect numbers. Numbers aren't everything, but we do respect them. The top 100 candidates for the scholarship become Coolidge senators, and we bring them to Washington where they learn all about civics, or to Plymouth Notch, to Vermont, to Coolidge's birthplace. This year they came to Coolidge's birthplace and they stayed up late with us because Coolidge was sworn in at 2:47 a.m. And we had a kind of Coolidge vigil where the kids stayed up until 2:47 to watch a reenactment of Coolidge's swearing in his village. His father swore him in, which is very unusual. Coolidge disliked pomp, so that was convenient. And the Coolidge senators get to see all kinds of things. This year, they also saw a naturalization of new Americans, so they could observe firsthand the value of citizenship and understand the duties along with the rights that come with U.S. citizenship. And so that was very nice for them. The senators there are 16 years old. That is, if your child is a junior, right now about to be a junior, that's the age to apply for the scholarship. But please don't tell me any names because I really do stay out of it. We have a professional team. We do our best to reduce bias. And it's a wonderful program honoring high school merit and effort, including effort from homeschoolers.
Thank you, Amity. And
my dog is bothering me. Don't do that. Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
Very unprofessional.
So you've shared a lot with us about Coolidge and the enthusiasm and his ideas of freedom. So the students who attend your various opportunities besides the movie, will they get time with you, or like who's your leadership team? Who will they be
We have a
with?
wonderful leader. His name is Matthew Denhart, and he's been with the program a decade. And he's in the Coolidge movies, so you can see him. Mr. Rhodes is a wonderful leader. He's been doing debate for about 5 years, maybe more. I don't want to get that wrong. And then we also have a new dean called William Beach. If you're interested in statistics, he's a dean, I say in an informal way, that is, he's a Coolidge fellow. Mr. Beach just led the Bureau of Labor Statistics as commissioner, which meant that he was in charge of that Friday number that moves the stock and bond markets, which is an employment number. And he's quite familiar with national accounts. At Coolidge, we have a real emphasis on knowledge as opposed to jingoism. That is, we're not, we don't sit around and have pep rallies. So we try to expose our students to top thinkers. And of course, I talk to the senators. I'm not the most popular speaker, but I do talk to them. The popular speakers tend to be the most substantive. This year we had Charles Calamiris of Columbia University and now the University of Austin, who lectured on the history of deposit insurance, which matters because banks did fail, they will fail, and they are failing. And so what is it? Is deposit insurance good or bad? He did a wonderful lecture. We had a couple called Michael and Olga Block speak about citizenship and their effort in school reform, almost approaching the scale of success of classical conversations. They founded the basis schools, in which there are 20 to 30 students right now. And those in Arizona will be familiar with those schools, which have a real record of teaching STEM well. So there you are. So, very serious people speaking to the kids. In the past, we've had, I don't know, this year, our gala speaker, please, if you want to get to know Coolidge, do buy a ticket to our gala. It's expensive. That's because we don't take money from the federal government right now. We're sort of like Hillsdale in that way. But this year, our speaker will be Fred Smith of FedEx about creating a company. He's a big fan of Calvin Coolidge. It's in December 2023. It's in New York. Contrary to rumor, New York is a wonderful place, particularly around Christmas, particularly if you're willing to pay that premium for a hotel. It's only one night, and that is usually packed with Coolidge guests, but also Coolidge senators. That is, our students come to the gala to hear exciting speakers.
I mean, that all just sounds really great. And I just applaud all that you're doing for these young people. I've recently gotten to know Bob Luddy, and we've developed a friendship. So we email with each other, and I really appreciate what his schools have done with you. And I know that he was glad that you were doing the debating, so he didn't have to.
Oh yeah, and we'd love to expand that. I know there's homeschool debate leagues.
Mm-hmm.
I think declamation may be an inroad.
Mm-hmm.
Then they can come and win the contest in July. The 4th of July is a hard thing for a family to give up, but one reason to do it is it was Calvin Coolidge's birthday.
Oh.
So it wasn't just the country's birthday. So if you want to have a meaningful 4th, maybe with a little more philosophy and a little less hot dog, but still plenty of hot dog, please come to the Notch around the 4th in Vermont. Drive. And let us know if you want to come. Ask Mr. Rhodes, even if you don't have a debater or a declaimer.
Yeah,
I think sometimes we call it Mr. Luddy calls it elocution, but we call it declaiming. Anyway, giving Coolidge speeches in contests.
Amanda, that sounds fun to our crowd, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
You should offer it for mothers. You'd probably get even more.
Right. That's true.
Well, thank you for joining us these last 40 minutes. Amity, it was really pleasant to have you.